So we will be continuing in just a few seconds with Jonathan Walker from Logistics UK and talking a bit about an overview of the warehousing market, but also opportunities for policies and what is happening around this area, which is very important. And I'm bringing Jonathan. Jonathan, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Let me also bring your, and I started with the wrong slide, sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Well, Jonathan from Logistics UK. Jonathan, thank you very much, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Just before I start, a little bit about us and me for those not familiar with us. So, Logistics UK is one of the country's largest business groups. We're the only organisation that represents the entire logistics industry. So many of you will know of us as previously the Freight Transport Association. And we cover everything from road, rail, air, sea, major users and customers of the logistics and supply chain industry, and therefore bring that sort of holistic approach. I joined Logistics UK back in December, and my role is, as it says there, looking at cities and infrastructure policy. And that basically means anything that is sort of physical networks and infrastructure that our members and that the industry relies on, and that includes issues around warehousing, planning, use of land by the logistics sector. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Thanks. So this is going to be a very, very quick run through as Nick said, as to what we're seeing in the sector, and probably sort of majoring slightly longer on the sort of policy, policy interventions that we want to see, that we think our members would benefit from in order to, I guess, alleviate some of the challenges and provide a brighter future and opportunities for growth in the sector. This slide probably tells you something you all know already. But we have seen a remarkable rise in demand for and use of land and property for logistics and warehousing purposes. And this isn't my data. This is government data from the ONS up to 2021. But you can quite clearly see how big a share or how big a change there has been in the number of business premises occupied by transport and storage businesses. So even in the 2 years, 2019 to 21, so that's even through at least the early days of COVID, still a significant increase. And I think we all know and are all familiar with as exactly why sort of logistics changed as a result of COVID. But it's from our perspective, we don't necessarily. We think we've witnessed perhaps a little bit of a slowdown in demand, a little bit of a saturation point, but the importance of our sector has never been more prominent in the public consciousness. Changes in consumer and commuter habits, while sort of ever changing and never fixed, they're clearly not going back to the patterns we witnessed pre-pandemic. This is going to present or continue to present challenges, but also opportunities for the sector. And again, I think we've had some great speakers already talking about some of the practical implications of changing customer, consumer, commuter habits on the industry. And I have no doubt that is going to continue to at least affect, if not continually increase, the demand for transport and logistics space. Next slide, please. And as we all know, as I say, these pressures of place pressures and premiums on high quality sites for logistics operations. This is backed up by the conversations we have regularly with members who, despite recent economic challenges, foresee plenty of opportunities for growth, accompanied by continued changes in the types of sites sought. And again, I think we've touched on this already in some of the previous speakers, so I'll try not to go over that again. But there is clearly an increasing emphasis on modern, flexible spaces with room for expansion, room for innovation, room for moving to a more sort of automated operations, low carbon operations, and in many cases, the sort of existing stock of warehousing, logistics, land and premises is outdated, and therefore either requires investment on the site or in many cases requires a sort of wholesale change by operators as well. And I think that's something we are witnessing and are likely to continue to see across the industry. So next slide, please. What I want to spend a little more time on is looking a little bit longer term about where we see the logistics and warehousing sector heading. I've talked about issues here. I don't want this to all appear to doom and gloom. That's not our role. We're here to champion the industry. I think it's more a sign, or in many cases, a sign of the industry facing up often to broader societal challenges, to issues that are affecting businesses right across the economy, but clearly play out differently in the logistics space. So I'll go through these relatively quickly before moving on, I think, perhaps to the more interesting points, which is where do we see opportunities for either government, public sector or private sector intervention. Again, I'm probably preaching a little bit to the choir here, but we all know skills continues to be an issue in the logistics industry. HGV drivers, I think, we're all familiar with that issue, but even though the pressure appears to have abated, it still continues to be something regularly cited by our members. Perhaps some of the immediate pressures we saw around COVID have fallen away slightly. It's still an aging workforce. It is still an industry that needs to do more and is doing more to try and attract a new generation of people into it. And we're very proud to work alongside a couple of other organisations on the Generation Logistics campaign, which is aimed at doing exactly that, showcasing the full breadth of careers available. But actually, what we're hearing a lot from our members, and again, probably people on the calls today will empathise with this, is some really key and acute shortages of skills on the basically on the warehousing and fulfillment side of things. So just literally kind of operatives, people to work in the warehouse, but some of the key skills within that as well. So forklift drivers and so on. And we're very keen to see reform in the skills system that will allow companies to address that. And I'll come on to that slightly. I've talked a bit about planning and supply. This is an issue that has many sort of policy levers and sort of implications at a national and a local level. There continue to be pressures in certain parts of the country, particularly those with sort of large-scale housing shortages, about the allocation of land and the need to protect land for logistics and warehousing operations, particularly coupled with the issue I identified previously about often existing sites not necessarily being suitable for future-proofed operations. We hear regularly about local inconsistency, particularly with our members who operate across a number of local authority boundaries, whereby they can find some planning authorities very supportive, very keen to assist in their growth and with sort of forward-thinking approaches to land allocation and planning approvals, and then often literally across the border can find a neighbouring authority is much more difficult to work with and very much if you like, follows the procedures line by line and doesn't necessarily work with businesses. And again, connectivity, there's always pressure and always demand for logistics and warehousing sites to be connected to the network. I think particularly as companies look to move toward larger sites, there is pressure on the availability of sites that are adequately connected to the strategic road network in particular, but also we see an increasing demand from our members who either want to modify existing sites or move on to sites that have rail access. I know rail is still a relatively small proportion of freight movements in the UK, but with pressures on decarbonisation, which I'll come on to, rail is kind of very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And as we're all grappling with as organisations, clearly, warehousing and fulfilment, and again, we've talked about this, CargoBytes being prime example, as to how the operations can move to a sort of zero, ideally a net zero carbon future. So it's around having the facilities in place for fleet transition. So in addition to the warehouses, ensuring that vehicles that are there as they're loaded, as they're idling, can recharge in the case of electric vehicles, or certainly have access to alternative fuels. And certainly the industry is doing what it can to trial and pilot new fuels, new modes of operation in order to make that transition. But we will want to see sort of far more if you like, kind of pressure from, or at least leadership from government, I should say, to help with that transition. A lot of our members, particularly those with large sites, are clearly very interested in self-generation and self-generation power. But it's often very difficult to justify the investment, and I'll come on to some of the reasons why. And above all, many of our members find it very hard to actually access electric grid capacity. So if you were thinking of moving wholesale a large operation to electric vehicles, and you can have a lot of vehicles on charge at one time, you're going to need to have a conversation with your electricity distributor, and that is often quite a difficult process. Next slide, please. So I said I was going to talk about some of the solutions and interventions, and this isn't just us, as an industry, saying that we expect government to do everything for us. It's absolutely not that. We want to work in partnership with government. I think I would say sort of across the board, though, one of our frustrations is often freight, logistics, warehousing being seen in isolation, often as the responsibility of Department for Transport and nobody else, when quite clearly it is the backbone of the national economy, and therefore a whole range, sort of plethora of government departments at a national, local, regional level all have a stake and a vested interest in ensuring that you, companies like people taking part today, and our members more broadly, can be that backbone, if you like. So coming to skills, I talked about previously, we're very keen to see reforms around the apprenticeship levy. So currently a lot of our members, a lot of companies in the sector aren't spending the levy that they pay, fundamentally in many cases because it doesn't quite work for what they need. If you need to do small scale sort of top up courses, reskilling, upskilling, that doesn't necessarily fit with the model of putting someone through a 24-month apprenticeship or whatever it might be. And we're very keen to see government consider reforms that would make that more of a training levy, which will give companies more flexibility to spend money on the training that actually delivers for their business, rather than, if you like, have their hands tied by sort of too onerous a system. I mentioned generational logistics, and that's a campaign I would recommend everyone who isn't aware of it to check that out. It's a fantastic opportunity, some great materials out there, and we're really trying to take that to the next stage now, working with schools, career services and so on to promote the industry to young people. NPPF, for those who aren't familiar with, don't inhabit the planning policy world, that's the National Planning Policy Framework, and government is considering large-scale reforms to that, and we're very keen to see logistics, warehousing placed right at the centre of that. So that would be a whole range of support around making it easier to decarbonise, to protect land, to prevent the conflict we often see between logistics operations and residential. So what's known as the sort of agent of change model, which is if housing developments are built next to your noisy warehousing logistics site, you're not responsible for the complaints that you might subsequently get. That the onus on that is on the developer to mitigate. We're later this year going to be launching some work that tries to raise awareness among planning authorities of the importance of logistics, again, to their local economies, and the need to safeguard, protect land, and to work with companies who are looking to invest and expand. And that last point, again, is something that has come out. Some of you may be aware of the government's Future of Freight strategy, and in that they talk about creating a national freight network, and this is something we're very passionate about supporting. So looking at the logistics and supply chain network holistically, rather than individual sites, individual routes, individual road schemes, actually where are we moving goods to and from, how is that trend likely to change in the future, and what interventions are going to be needed to ensure we have the right infrastructure, and we have the right space along that infrastructure for warehousing opportunities, and we have the basics in place like driver welfare facilities. And finally, on decarbonisation, a number of measures there again, which I've slightly touched on, but we want to see greater incentives in the system for companies that are generating electricity above and beyond what they want, so that they are rewarded for feeding in back into the system, be that through solar or wind or other forms of renewables on site. Considering a broadening of permitted development rights to make it easier for companies to invest in either sort of power generation on their sites or things like charging points, that sort of thing, and then again further support to connect to the grid, so that actually if you are a business that says I need to put in significant number of charging points and it's going to be sort of significantly above and beyond my current energy usage, that the energy distribution operator works with you in order to do that, and it's not an overly costly or bureaucratic process, as too many of our members find at the moment. So that's the end of the slides, and I feel like it's been a kind of very whistle stop tour of what we're doing. I'm very happy to take any questions on that. As I say, it's a very broad area, and hope that's given a little bit of an overview of the sort of policy landscape. In addition to some of the more detailed discussions that have been had previously, but my details can be shared afterwards as well if anyone wants to.
Yes, you will be able to receive more information, as I mentioned previously, not just from Jonathan Logistics UK, but also from the other speakers as well. Some of them have prepared additional resources. And just a few questions, Jonathan. Do you think there is enough, just in general in the UK, not only on a local, but also on a national level, enough space for warehousing and for logistics operations?
I think it's a very localized issue, and often it's not just about the availability of space; it's the quality of that space as well. So, if previously I did some work with the British Chambers of Commerce, and we used to look very locally at planning issues. I'm based in the northeast. We do have a significant amount of brownfield site here that is often held up as being opportunity for development, but there's brownfield land and there's brownfield land, and a lot of it here is ex-industrial. It's contaminated, so it brings with it its own issues. If you were to compare that perhaps with some of the more built-up areas of the southeast, for example, you've actually got far greater tension between industrial and employment land and the need for significant housing development as well. So I think there is sufficient land. I think all too often we have seen a one-size-fits-all approach from national government when it comes to planning policy, which then doesn't take into account the pressures of those two extremes.
And the final question I wanted to look at was urban, and which is something we spoke about quite a lot from the very beginning. Is there enough space there? And you mentioned the existing stock is probably not fit for purpose, but then we also have some people say, well, you can just use offices. Is this something that Logistics UK even considers as a possible solution?
I think we're open to all forms of kind of innovative approaches, and I think the first step is getting local authorities, city governments or whoever it might be to have that conversation, to think about it. I think at the moment, too often we're seeing, in many cases, a well-intentioned desire around things such as decarbonisation, clean air, and so on, to reduce traffic flows in cities, and then they try and solve the problem afterwards of the fact that, well, we still need to get goods into our cities to fill the shop shelves, to support people's everyday lives. Number of cities are trialling innovative approaches. We're not sure yet what is the single approach, whether there will be a one-size-fits-all approach. But the industry is willing to talk to local government. I know that, to look at how we can improve certainly last mile logistics when it comes to decarbonisation. So colleagues of mine are very heavily involved in the cargo bikes conversation, electric vans, whatever it might be. So I think everyone is aware of the problem. I'm not sure anyone has the full solution yet.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much. As I mentioned, you will be able to receive more information from Logistics UK, Jonathan, as well as the previous speakers a bit later. Thank you very much, Jonathan. We